Languages are messy. They borrow words from each other, have irregular verb conjugations, and their spelling systems can sometimes do with a bit of work. The reason for this last bit of messiness usually comes down to a simple matter of history, and that's what we're going to explore today. Before dictionaries and standardized spelling came about, people just wrote how they spoke. This was fine as long as the material you were reading was written by someone who spoke with the same dialect as you. For instance, if your dialect drops R's, then you could probably work out that ka might mean an automobile. Since writing was usually not meant for widespread consumption in its earliest forms, this system was good enough. But if you read a letter from elsewhere, the differences between your dialect and the writer's dialect might make deciphering their letter a lot more difficult. Major standardization of English spelling started happening around the time the printing press was introduced to England in 1477 by the printer William Caxton. If you want to write something down in a standardized way, and no such standard yet exists, then you need to make the standard up yourself. Caxton had to decide not only what dialectal words to use, but also how to spell them. As printing technology spread, it took these newly standardized spellings with it. Eventually, people started getting used to the idea that a word should have one correct spelling. So through this process, the words busy and berry ended up with their current spelling, even though they don't entirely make sense to some speakers of the language. Specifically, why the U's? Well, as with many issues in linguistics, we need to look to the past in order to find the answer. The word busy is descended from the Old English word busy. You'll notice the Y in the Old English word is pronounced like E but with rounded lips, represented by this symbol in the IPA. As Old English evolved into Middle English, spoken from around 1100 to 1500, it split into 5 dialects: Northern, Southern, Kentish, East Midlands, and West Midlands. In the East Midlands dialect, that Y, U, in Old English eventually started being pronounced like the I in pit. People who grew up in the East Midlands pronounced busy as busy, and so, naturally, they spelled it with an I before spelling was standardized. But around this time, trade around the country started to increase, and a lot of trade came through London. Traders from all over the country came through London and brought their pronunciations and their spellings with them. The Y sound in Old English developed differently in the dialects of the West Midlands and the South. In these dialects, the Old English U started being pronounced as oo, and as such, speakers of this dialect wrote busy with a U. In the IPA, we can write this pronunciation like this, boozy. Standardization didn't happen overnight, however, and spelling was still quite flexible. People often alternated spellings, sometimes even using spellings that didn't really reflect their own pronunciation. The differences were subtle enough, though, that they didn't impede understanding for most readers. As a result, dialects and spelling started to mix just as spelling started to be standardized. This is how we ended up with an East Midlands pronunciation, but a West Midlands spelling. Another word that this happened to was berry. This one also came from an Old English word containing I, in this case, burian. The modern word is spelled with a U too, just like busy, because, as we've mentioned, the Y changed to a U, oo sound in the West Midlands and the South. But we don't pronounce berry as buri, so what happened here? Once again, this comes from a pronunciation in another dialect of Middle English, in this case, the dialect of Kent. In this dialect, the Old English U sound eventually became an E sound, so the Middle English word for berry would have been written as berrien by these speakers. But just like with busy, the spelling of berry reflects the pronunciation from a different dialect. If all the dialects had mixed sufficiently to the extent that a common pronunciation and therefore a common spelling had emerged before standardization, then the two words we discussed today would probably have more sensible spellings. But that's not what happened. Society was changing, trade was increasing, and people were moving around and exchanging dialects just as the language was being standardized. Spelling often seems like a boring subject, but when you look at it from a historical standpoint, it can be a fascinating snapshot of a very interesting time in the history of the English language. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more linguistics and check my channel out for more language, culture, history, and memes.